Welcome to Taking Care of Business with Freddie Fix-It Santori as they bring the power of AMP2.TV video format to the radio.
Tonight's airing of Taking Care of Business is being replaced by Breaking News Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, where we'll bring you a legal perspective on today's current events.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
The content of the following program, including all statements from the host and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by a host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program should not be viewed as a substitute for personal consultation with an attorney. Welcome to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, who brings you all the latest news in the legal world. Jeff will be discussing a variety of legal topics with experts in the field. If you would like to ask a question or share a story on the air, please call toll-free 888-565-1470. Once again, that's 888-565-1470. Now, let's talk legal with Jeff Van Treese.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Talk Legal. I'm your host, Jeff Van Treese. I'm an attorney with the law firm Oltman, Flynn & Kubler, where we specialize in intellectual property, including patents, trademarks, and copyrights, as well as elder law. You can find out more and view all episodes of this show on our website at oltmanpatent.com. That's OLTMANPATENT.com. I'd also like to acknowledge our other sponsor, Fresh Start Tax. Fresh Start Tax offers a full range of accounting services, including basic tax returns, as well as assistance with tax levies, wage garnishments, and any other tax-related concern. You can visit them online at freshstarttax.com. I'd like to thank all of our listeners, both those of you tuning in on the AM dial, as well as those watching online. If you have a question, comment, or story that you would like to share on the air, please feel free to call us toll-free at 888-565-1470. Once again, that toll-free number is 888-565-1470. We welcome your calls. I have a special guest in studio this evening. We're on not at our regularly scheduled time. We're normally on Tuesday nights from 6 until 6:30. This evening, we're on Monday night. We're addressing the recent protests over the death of Eric Garner and the recent grand jury decision not to indict the officer in that case. My guest this evening is Jeff Joyner. He is a law enforcement officer and an attorney, so he sees this issue from multiple angles. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show and your willingness to discuss this case.
It's an honor. Thank you, sir.
So just some background on the case, if you haven't been watching the news. A man by the name of Eric Garner is a 43-year-old asthmatic, had some other health issues, including obesity, was stopped by police officers under suspicion of selling untaxed tobacco or cigarettes. And he essentially got into an argument with those officers. The event was recorded by a friend of Eric Garner's. He was telling them that he didn't like that they were harassing him. He was clearly very displeased with the situation. It was unclear from the video what, if any, orders the officers had given them. The officers' statements indicated that Mr. Garner was resisting arrest. From the video, it was clear that a chokehold submission was administered to Mr. Garner, and he went down. Shortly afterwards, he was stating that he couldn't breathe. He stated this on a number of occasions, and they seemed to continue to subdue him. There were about half a dozen officers or so. The officer that administered the chokehold, his name was Daniel Pantaleo, and that officer was the subject of the recent grand jury proceedings. Shortly after Mr. Garner had been subdued, it was clear that he was unconscious and not moving. An ambulance was called. He was put in the ambulance, and he died en route to the hospital. So that's a summary of the events. So, Jeff, you've been in law enforcement for almost 10 10 or so years now. And I'd like to ask you about the use of the chokehold in law enforcement and the extent to which it is used and the dangers that it potentially creates. So if you would comment on that.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And like I said, it is an honor to be here tonight. First, I'd like to say that this case certainly is a tragedy for all involved. It is a tragedy certainly for Mr. Garner and his family, and also for the law enforcement officers. I can tell you, being out there, that no officer ever wants to encounter a situation where someone is either seriously hurt or passes away as a result of our or as a result of law enforcement's interaction. It's very important that law enforcement officers use the power and use the authority that is given to them in a very appropriate manner. Likewise, it's also important that individuals, when encountered by law enforcement, act in an appropriate manner as well. As far as this particular move or what have you, I don't know that much about New York law. Obviously, the grand jury has spoken as onto that topic. It certainly is a tragedy, and I wasn't there to be honest with you, Jeff, and it's not something that that maybe I would personally employ in my particular interactions. But like I said, this is a very tragic case for everyone involved. That's about all I can say about that.
Well, we have a situation here where we have an individual,
Right.
whether or not he was resisting, it's unclear to me, but let's say for argument's sake that he was. If you have an individual that appears to be resisting arrest,
Certainly.
and that person may also appear to suffer from some physical disabilities.
Right.
In this case, the man had asthma.
Right.
He was also clearly obese. In a situation like that, would you take a different approach in trying to subdue him?
Well, certainly. Law enforcement is not one size fits all. That's very important, and we need to always understand that tactics and operations need to be used in a manner that's appropriate for the situation in which they're being used. First and foremost, obviously, we want to ensure the safety of everyone, of fellow officers, of the public, of any subjects with which we come in contact with. And if an individual begins to show symptoms that may require medical intervention, then that's, of course, that's primary. We need to make sure that we secure the scene, make the scene safe, and obtain medical intervention for that person. So, to answer your question, Jeff, if an individual is showing symptoms and signs that need to be addressed, we need to go ahead and address them. And like I said, it's not one size fits all. So, if I was encountering an individual such as yourself, or I was encountering an individual that was different from yourself, then maybe my interaction or my approach would be a little bit different. Again, the goal here is to gain compliance, to gain safety, and to ensure the situation comes to a successful conclusion. And that, of course, means that if a person needs to be arrested, they're arrested, and no one is harmed as a result.
Just to draw an analogy, because sometimes you have acts of violence that might occur at a assisted living facility or nursing home. In
Sure.
fact, I've heard of scenarios where that has occurred. Somebody may have dementia, and
Certainly.
this may contribute to violent actions. If you're dealing with an octogenarian with dementia that is acting violently and might be potentially resisting the officer's instructions, you're not going to tackle this person, right? I mean, that's not clearly in a situation like that, you're not going to do that.
Right, and that's where training comes into play. Training is very important, and it's very important that all agencies and all training academies instruct their individuals and give training as to how to handle all sorts of individuals across the wide swath of the society and the public that we serve. So that's precisely correct. If an officer was to engage an individual at an assisted living facility that may be showing signs of being emotionally disturbed, possibly due to some medical issues, then that needs to be taken into account. Again, this is all about respect. The law enforcement officers should respect and need to respect the public that they serve, and the public needs to respect the authority of the law enforcement officers who serve them.
So in this particular case, Eric Garner said on a number of occasions that he couldn't breathe when he was on the ground. My understanding is that at least some of the responding officers claimed that because he was speaking, that he must have been able to breathe. That's something that to me just doesn't seem reasonable. Again, they were dealing with this in a split-second scenario where they had to make a decision on the ground. But if he's saying he can't breathe, that seems like that's something you have to take immediate attention of, because seconds can matter. That person might lose consciousness and it could be fatal. So what do you make of that?
Well, to be honest with you, Jeff, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't comment as to whether or not that means he could or could not breathe. But absolutely, when anyone displays any sort of distress or anything like that, the medical intervention needs to be obtained immediately. I believe it was in this case, but that's absolutely, like I said, absolutely first and foremost that we need to, one, make the situation safe by whatever, if that means making an arrest, whatever. But it's very, very important that we get individuals the help that they need through emergency medical services.
Now, this event was recorded by a friend of the decedent, Eric Garner, and this has prompted certain legislators and others in the public eye to say that recording is absolutely necessary. This also happened with the Michael Brown case, where it couldn't really be established what happened, especially for that second string of shots that had occurred. I want to ask you, how important is it that events, especially confrontations between people and law enforcement, that these be recorded?
Well, if you're asking my opinion, Jeff, I believe it's very, very important that we have recording of incidents and interactions between the public and between law enforcement officers. I personally am in favor of dash cams and other devices, but I believe it's very important that we use these appropriately. And this is what I mean by that. In that if we decide as a society that we're going to equip our officers with cameras, which, again, I personally believe is a good thing, then we also need to keep or make sure that the recordings and the individuals that are captured in the recordings, number one, that privacy is protected, and number two, we also need to decide if we're going to protect the police officer who has the camera. And this is what I mean by that. I am absolutely of the opinion that if a law enforcement officer is captured doing wrongdoing on film, whether it's his own or some other, then that officer needs to face the full consequences of the law. That's what this society is built upon, that no one is above the law, and that each person is equal before the courts. So if a law enforcement officer is found to have done wrongdoing, absolutely that person needs to experience the full effect of the law. But the other side of that is that if we have an individual who purposely and intentionally makes false claims about a law enforcement officer, that person too needs to feel the full force of the law. It is my understanding that there were individuals in the recent case in Missouri and other cases that admitted that they lied under oath, that they made things up for whatever reasons personal to them. That can't be tolerated. Just as we can't tolerate any sort of misconduct by police officers, we certainly cannot tolerate as a society any sort of falsifications or perjured testimony or lies made about law enforcement officers. So what I believe about cameras, Jeff, is that yes, I personally am in favor of them, but they need to be used, the footage needs to be used appropriately.
So we also have here an officer that had been the subject of several civil rights allegations. My understanding is that there were several civil rights lawsuits brought against him, one in which somebody claimed that they were strip searched by the officer and then the charges were dismissed shortly thereafter. What do you make of that when you're looking at a case and you see an officer that has a history of at least of allegations made against him or her versus an officer that doesn't? And what role does that play in assessing that officer's credibility?
Well, Jeff, allegations can be made by any person, anytime against an individual,
Right.
And that's why we are, law enforcement agencies have internal affairs bureaus, and that's why we have things like 1983 actions and things like that. It's interesting you bring that up. That this officer was the subject of some civil rights lawsuits, and I'd like to say that civil rights lawsuits and those types of actions, 1983 actions, those are precisely the forum in which complaints and issues and things like that against law enforcement officers should be brought. That's why we have a court system, in this country. That's what we're built upon. You know, I've always been of the opinion that if an individual believes that he or she has been either discriminated against or treated unfairly, you know, the road, the field is not the place to fight those allegations. Should I say that the appropriate place is either with an Internal Affairs Bureau or with a court system, as we see here. You know, this particular officer had apparently some lawsuits filed against him, and that's exactly where I believe that these issues should be addressed in a court of law.
So we have to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back to discuss this case. Stay tuned.
This program is brought to you by Fresh Start Tax. Fresh Start Tax offers a full range of tax and accounting services, including tax return preparation and bookkeeping, as well as back taxes, wage garnishments, unfiled returns, or any other tax-related concern. Our dedicated team of tax attorneys, CPAs, and former IRS agents offer over 60 years of professional tax experience. For a free consultation, call 866-700-1040. That's 866-700-1040. You can also visit us on the web at freshstarttax.com. This program is brought to you by the law firm of Altman, Flynn, and Kubler. Our law firm specializes in elder law and intellectual property, including patents, trademarks, and copyrights. If you would like to patent your idea, please contact our Fort Lauderdale office for a free consultation. We offer elder law services, including estate planning, long-term care planning, and preparation of healthcare documents. We strive to plan for your future needs while allowing you to retain as much dignity and independence as possible. To find out more or to make an appointment, call 954-563-4814. That's 954-563-4814. Or visit us online at altmanpatent.com. That's OLTMANPATENT.com. Spokesperson, not an attorney. You're listening to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, who brings you all the latest news in the legal world. If you would like to ask a question or share a story on the air, please call toll-free 888-565-1470. Once again, that's 888-565-1470. Now, back to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese.
And we're back. You've been listening to Talk Legal. I'm your host, Jeff Van Treese. We're discussing the recent case in New York, Eric Garner, and the officer, Daniel Pantaleo, and the grand jury decision not to indict him. My guest this evening is Jeff Joyner. He's an attorney and also a law enforcement officer. We are discussing this case, and I'd like to turn our attention to the grand jury. Now, the grand jury process is something that is very interesting and I think really gets to the heart of the matter here. In a grand jury proceeding, a prosecutor is asking the grand jury to make a determination as to whether there is enough evidence to demonstrate probable cause that a defendant should be charged with a crime. In this case, and in New York, the grand jury proceedings are held in secret. There's no defense counsel present, and all of the jury instructions are put forth by the prosecutor. So it's very difficult at this point to determine exactly what went on in the grand jury proceedings. But we can speculate about what might have happened and what the grand jury was considering in this case. So, Jeff, if you might want to give our viewers, give our listeners and our viewers just a general overview of how the grand jury process works, because we do have that here in Florida as well.
We certainly do, Jeff. We have the grand jury process here in Florida. Here in Florida is also secret, much like other jurisdictions. Here in Florida, the grand jury is impaneled for several different reasons. We have grand juries that can be impaneled to investigate a certain issue and deliver a report. And we also have grand juries that are impaneled to look over crimes or incidents that are presented to them by the local state attorneys. and either deliver a true bill or a no true bill.
Now, true bill means that there's a finding of probable cause, and a no true bill is a finding by the grand jury that there is no probable cause.
That's exactly right. So in that case, for example, where a crime or an incident is presented to the grand jury by the state attorney, here in Florida, the state attorneys, have a wide discretion to file charges against individuals. Indeed, the only charge for which the grand jury is necessary is a first-degree murder charge. First-degree murder charges in the state of Florida must be presented to a grand jury, which, of course, as I said, is held in secret. All other charges can be direct filed by the state attorney's office. We also here in Florida have a system by which grand juries can meet and they can look at particular situations and they can deliver recommendations for reform or for change, while at the same time deciding that there either is or is not enough evidence to press or to indict individuals for crimes they may have committed. So we have a system by which we have a grand jury that looks at crimes and determines whether or not there's enough evidence for a true bill, that is to find that probable cause of crime has occurred. And we have grand juries that can investigate things like construction projects or city management, things like that, and deliver recommendations as to how things can be done differently.
Now, the interesting thing about a grand jury proceeding is that it really does lend itself to sabotage by the district attorney. If the district attorney doesn't want the case to go forward, he or she can sabotage it, and there really would be no way of knowing what happened. There's some allegation that that could have happened in the Michael Brown case down in Ferguson, that the prosecutors are overly generous to the officer in that case by potentially introducing exculpatory evidence, which they didn't have to, and instructing the jury that they also had to find that the decedent, Michael Brown, that the officer did not act in self-defense when he shot Michael Brown, which the prosecutor didn't have to do that. So in this case, we really don't have enough details to know one way or the other, but there's always some suspicion on some people's minds that because the district attorney or the prosecutor works so closely with law enforcement that that the district attorney is going to be reluctant to prosecute a law enforcement officer, and so they can potentially sabotage the grand jury proceedings. So to what extent are those suspicions founded?
To be honest with you, Jeff, I mean, that's the great thing about America, is that everyone's entitled to their opinion, and we have, a very strong freedom of speech here, and individuals are certainly free to believe anything they wish. I'm certainly not cynical enough to believe such things, but again, that's just my opinion, and I certainly respect the opinions of those that would differ with me, and those that would believe maybe that's the case. But I personally don't subscribe to that certain philosophy. That's just me, though, Jeff.
Now, in this case, the officer, Daniel Pantaleo, I'm referring to the Eric Garner case, he was charged with negligent homicide and manslaughter, but the prosecutor didn't go for the lesser included offense of reckless endangerment. Do you think that's unusual, or is that normal?
I can't speak to that, Jeff. I'm not familiar with New York law enough to make an opinion on that.
Now, in this case, the standard is that the jury is considering is whether the actions of the officer was reckless. And, that's sort of in the eye of the beholder. What constitutes reckless action? Is simply failing to follow the police manual, is that reckless? Or is it something greater than that? It's just difficult really to pinpoint what that means. So do you have any thoughts on that?
That's how the grand jury system works, that it was presented to that group of New York citizens, and they were able to make a decision, based on whatever evidence was presented with them and to them, and whatever instructions were given to them. But again, they made their finding, and that's all really I can say about that.
Yeah, it's always difficult to comment because we just don't really know what happened in that jury room. I think it's important to note here also that racial profiling, this is sort of in the backdrop of what's going on here, are suspicions of racial profiling. and discrimination, and that's a very real thing. And it's very important for anyone that believes that they might be the victim of racial profiling to know that that they should stand up against that, and that's something that is very worthy of a great deal of attention from the public, and that's something that really they need, that there's a good reason to fight, but the place and time for that is not in the street.
That's absolutely right, Jeff. As I said before, that's what the beautiful thing about America is that we have court systems, and we have a First Amendment that allows individuals to petition the government for redress of their grievances, whatever grievances that may be. The proper forum for that is in a courtroom, is in an internal affairs bureau, is with an attorney. It's very important that, again, as I said before, law enforcement officers respect the public that they serve. It's also equally important that the public respect the law enforcement officers who serve them.
And like you said, you might get yourself killed if you try to resist arrest at that, even if it's a wrongful arrest. If you attempt to resist it, you really might be endangering yourself. So, like we were saying, the place to fight that is not in the street. For your own safety. Now, I'd also like to just mention, we only have a few minutes left here, that there is a civil rights investigation going on. That's probably going to be very difficult to prove because they would actually have to demonstrate racial animus on the part of the officer, and that's historically very difficult to prove. The same thing with the Michael Brown case as well. And I'd like to mention, of course, the protests. The protests have been relatively peaceful at this point, and I'm wondering what your assessment of that is.
Well, certainly, and again, as I said, the beautiful thing about this country is that we're allowed to protest, we're allowed to make our voices heard, and that's very important. It's also important, though, for individuals to understand that not all law enforcement officers are the same. Behind that badge, behind that uniform of any law enforcement officer, of anybody, of any doctor or lawyer or attorney, or any other individual, is an individual with certain feelings and emotions, just like anybody else. So,
well, thank you very much, Jeff. We're running out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. You've been listening to Talk Legal. Join us tomorrow night, Tuesday, from 6 to 6:30, where my guest will be personal injury attorney and consumer advocate Ed Ricci. Thank you for listening. I would like to thank my guest, Jeff Joyner, once again. I'm Jeff Van Treese. Have a great evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese. Tune in next week for more insightful and exciting information about the law. You can contact Jeff by email at jvt2law@gmail.com or give him a call at 561-789-6866. That's 561-789-6866. The content of the preceding program, including all statements from the host and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by a host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material of this program should not be viewed as a substitute for personal consultation with an attorney. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff,